the most important thing, when realistically we have to remember that's not the case necessarily, depending on where you're at or who you are and what you need. It's very dependent on your individual circumstance. But assuming that you've gotten to that point where you've decided, hey, I need or deserve or want a higher salary, a negotiated salary, I think it's important to, one of the things to consider is, where I'm at right now, if this is where I'm attempting to get a different salary or different benefits package, what is the business use case and the need compared to what I'm offering and where I want to grow and develop to then get myself a higher salary. I think it's helpful to align yourself in that way, assuming that those things also bring you happiness and fulfillment and joy. That leads to a greater positive impact at the end of the day, rather than going down a direction that doesn't align with the business and what they can offer, what they want. So considering all that, and on top of what Joe and Neil have already said, how can you line yourself up with what the business's needs are?
Kind of coming off of what's been said, specifically what Neil said, this is like I graduated in 2023. I think I said 2024. But so this is my first job and I moved away from home. So for me, like my major concerns were what's the cost of living out here and how is that actually affecting what my salary is going to be? Because I looked at the average of what my position would be, and it was wildly different than what I was offered because of the cost of living. Um, and thinking about specifically if you're getting your first job like I was and moving away from home and trying and like living on your own, for me, a lot of my main concerns were about safety and being able to feel at home, with those first kind of starting like years at a job. So I said like cost of living was very important to me.
Awesome. Yeah, those are all great responses. And I think some of you guys briefly touched on this, but how should candidates prepare before entering a salary negotiation?
Your research. um, know what you should be asking for and know what like you can pretty easily find average salaries for a position you're looking for. And then, like I said, look at cost of living, look at that company. You can honestly find a lot of information about the company and what they could or like might be paying other people. So just do your research and kind of like what Joe was saying at the beginning, come in confident and know that like the worst they can say is no. And that's really not a big deal.
One of the things I'd call out about big tech employers who are looking to bring in new college grad talent is they've generally built programs that are employment factories. So if you're entering a Google or a Microsoft or some other large established company, you're following a very well-paved path. A lot of other people have been through it. They will have documented what their offer looked like. They will give you a sense of what the flexibility is in terms of being able to negotiate from there. The company wants to move, sorry, Google's talking to me. They'll want to move people through the process quickly, so they're not going to turn each hire into an extensive negotiation along the way because their goal is to get you there rather than to a competitor. And that's to your advantage.
I think that when answering the question, like, how can I prepare before entering a negotiation, is first, let's understand the context. Are we talking about a new hire? Are we talking about negotiating the salary of an existing employee and relationship there? Because there are different ways to prepare for that, I think. And all of it does involve doing some research. But if you are a current employee, it's usually the story goes it's harder to negotiate your salary once you're in versus when you're in the application mode. And I'm sure we'll get into what, like, all the reasons why it's great to do it at the point of getting an offer. But assuming that you maybe are there already and want to negotiate your salary, I think it is helpful to talk about these things, find your safe spaces to understand at your current employer a little more context than what you would have by just looking at your own pay stub. This isn't always an option depending on who your peers are and the culture of the company. But if you can find ways to understand more internally, that certainly benefits the employee to have that context. That being said, it doesn't give you the ammunition that will guarantee you to say, hey, this person's making this and I'm making that. So I say that with a big grain of salt to say, you get your information. We'll talk more about maybe some strategies around that. But many times it always will have to come back to like, well, what is this person offering the business right now? What do we have the budget to meet that need and that desire? So I would just add that in terms of doing your research if you're in the circumstance of being a current employee and you'd like to negotiate.
I view a lot of this, to continue what Katie had said. A lot of it is a conversation, and if you're coming into a company fresh, it's ideally a conversation that has been occurring throughout the interview process. Some states are more transparent about salary ranges, which is a great way to know from the onset. But asking, maybe not in an initial phone screen interview, but asking one or two interviews in for an approximate salary range, making sure that there's a rough alignment with either a recruiter or a hiring manager is a good way to start. And then as well, just based upon the senses you get from the company as you're interviewing, you might have a sense whether or not they are willing to negotiate on salary first. And then second, if there's anything on the benefits end, I've previously negotiated time PTO amount in the past to some success. And as well, some companies do offer annual or signing bonuses that may or may not be negotiable. So those are some things that I sort of try to keep in mind. There's no hard and fast rule. It often is using judgment and getting a better understanding of, as said before, how the company operates.
Joe, that's a really good call out on the signing bonus. One of the ways that it's easier to access something like that is by showing that there's something you're leaving behind in an opportunity you're moving away from. If, for instance, you have a bonus coming up in the near future, but the company that's trying to hire you wants you sooner, as they generally all do, it's totally appropriate to say, hey, if I stuck it out here for X weeks, months, whatever, I would see this bonus. Can you help me make this whole based on what would happen were I to stick around? That's just normal. You're not going to offend anybody by saying that.
Yeah, thank you all. So our next question is, what are some common mistakes that candidates or people might make during salary negotiations? Maybe personal, maybe ones you've heard that you think might happen. But yeah.
I can start with some ideas. I'm sure we'll have a lot here. In the framework of like doing your research, adjacent to that is sort of knowing at least somewhat of what you want to define success or define that you will say yes to an offer or that you will continue to invest in this company that you're currently at. I think one of the ways, a common pitfall, especially for someone who hasn't been through a lot of offers and seen it and felt it, is not really knowing to be a little bit more specific in your ask. I would see someone saying, hey, do you have anything more for me? And that sort of vague ask as not leading to something successful because you're not being specific enough of what that means for you to say yes to that offer. So that's a basic one, but understand, even if it's a number that you've decided without a ton of understanding of like why that's the number you want, let's just say it's a number that you want to get to that is appropriate for that role. Be specific once you're at that stage of like saying, this is what I would need to say yes, rather than asking for any amount and letting that employer make the decision, because it will inevitably be something minimal on their end, most likely. So be specific and have that be informed by research that you've done or an understanding of what you need to be successful in that negotiation. I'll start there.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, in a related vein, um, it shouldn't necessarily the number you want is a number that likely is innately tied to feeling of value and is a personal request. Um, but when you're making this request to a potential employer, it sort of needs to be cold and calculated in that it's backed up by a piece of data that you have from elsewhere saying this is what makes sense within the context of my skill set. Or two, really advocating what you bring to the table that other, comparable pieces of data might not include. The MUD education teaches us how to be very broad, cross-functional thinkers, and that in and of itself makes you valuable within the workplace. So finding, specific examples, hopefully that the employer has told you positively during the interview that they enjoyed that you said, are great ways to really root your request in the value that you're bringing to the business.
As a manager, bringing people in or helping be on the opposite end of salary negotiations, one of the things that I've seen uh, people I'm having a negotiation with do that sabotages themselves is using unreliable information and anchoring on it. There's a website, Levels FYI, which is good for understanding the comparison of titles and compensation ranges at different companies and includes a self-reported salary element of it. I can tell you as a hiring manager, as a new college grad, what I've seen versus what is self-reported in the tool has a significant discrepancy. And the fact that somebody on the internet said they were able to get $300,000 as a new college graduate entering a company doesn't mean they actually got $300,000 as a new college grad entering the company. So don't anchor your own belief on what a good outcome is from data like that you just can't substantiate and seems at odds with what you're seeing around you.
And if I could actually jump in and ask a follow-up, Neil, are there places that you do recommend, like maybe slightly more reliable to find this kind of information?
I like the pay transparency initiatives that are taking hold in some states at this point. You can go to similar looking companies to the one that you're interested in, or even the one you're interested in, and see what a normal range for a state is, as well as how the company is handling that. Do they differentiate based on state of employment to the cost of living comment that Emma made earlier? Asking somebody who is not going to perceive it as a comparison of you to them is another good thing to do. Leverage the MUD network, talk to people that you know that are experienced in or like in a management role or leadership role and would be able to judge what a reasonable offer is. That will serve you very well. The I don't want to get in trouble on this. We are recorded, but one of the things that I always feel a little sad about is when I know people are comparing compensation when they're at basically the same level of their career, because in most cases, somebody is going to feel bad as an outcome of that. And it's not necessarily anything that that person did that ends up saying, oh, I have the smaller compensation package that was wrong. Some circumstances just produced that situation. Um, the flip of that is I've counseled a lot of people early in career who have their friend who is their friend who has been the most successful person in their network, and they're comparing themselves to what that person has been able to achieve. Again, there's some combination of factors that produce that outcome there. Uh, I would encourage people not to be sad because you know one person who is wildly more successful than you. Don't use that as your anchor for what a good outcome is in negotiation. Do what's right for you, not what somebody else seems to have done.
Yeah. And are you catching yourself defining successful as simply a higher salary or something? That's tricky. And I wanted to add to Neil's points here too, where um, we're talking about different factors and things that are applying to your end salary. We know that there are biases still baked into the system. We know that there are folks that don't ask for it and automatically get maybe a higher salary. These are unfortunate things that might exist at companies in different ways. And it's appreciated when companies recognize that and do what they can do to counteract that, to be very clear with their salary ranges, to stick to that, to test their biases. So just stating that out loud a little bit, knowing that, like, unfortunately, we are working around some of those factors still. So thank you for sharing that, Neil. I will say that what I have seen also not work, or a pitfall, is, again, for an example of an existing employee trying to get a different title or move into a new role, and this might be sort of a startup company that doesn't have all their stuff together yet vibe, but it can be not helpful to find a role at a completely different company that, with the title that you think you want, which has its own job description that maybe seems similar, and grab that salary and say, well, I deserve that salary here, when HR and leadership is immediately, and I've seen this, going to respond like, that's apples and oranges. This is not helpful to make your case to get a higher salary for that job that you want. And that feels counterintuitive because you're finding something that is similar to what you would have at that company. But unfortunately, at least in this instance, and times where I've seen it at these smaller startups, again, it's more helpful to root yourself in, like, what does your current company need and want? Make that case over time, rather than suddenly get somewhere and find a comparison at a different company.
All great points. I particularly like, in a company that is newer or less mature, there aren't necessarily rules that you can follow. They're inventing how to handle situations that emerge every day as part of being a startup.
I'd like to add, I've only found two pieces of fully robust, verifiable data. And that is one, sort of at a very high level, the Bureau of Labor Statistics collects data about, in essence, through all of our tax records, at least in the United States, what people with different coded jobs, be it, electrical engineer or computer scientist at a very high level, make, and they break this out on a per metropolitan area on the BLS.gov website. So I've used this, specifically when I was at a small startup, and I felt somewhat undervalued, and I said, here, look at this website. This is everyone who lives in, this greater metro area, and I'm just asking for the lowest 25th percentile. And that was a really effective technique. I'm like, I'm not claiming to be as effective as, the 75% of older, more tenured people in the entire metro area, but here, just I think this would be fair.
I think now that we're kind of on this discussion of some tools that we can use to find reliable salary data, are there any other ones that you guys have found particularly helpful? I know, Joe, you mentioned a few, but any other ones out there that you'd recommend to find data about your role, industry, or your location, salary preferences?
I wrote down Joe's recommendations. Those are new and seem like great new resources I had not previously been aware of. Joyce?
Sorry, I was gonna say, just in case this isn't enough, like, the Mud Network is very useful. I had talked to so many Mud people on my journey to the salary I have now, and just never, it's always there for you.
Joyce in chat calls out that for federal employees, there are published salaries available online.
Great, thank you all. So I have a question. How should candidates respond if they're asked about salary expectations early in the interview process? And maybe do you think that would be different, I guess, if like salaries brought up at different points in like an interview or application process?
Does anyone feel strongly want to answer first?
This is a pretty classic negotiation challenge, which is the first person to say something probably loses. The way I have seen people approach it successfully is if you have a sense of what your value is, what you're looking for as a good offer out of it, just lead with that and give the company the chance to say, yeah, we can afford you or we can't afford you early on. So you know whether you're wasting your time in your effort to get what you're looking for.
Yeah, I have appreciated, at least in the tech world, that I think salaries are beginning to be posted a little more frequently. I'm seeing that on and legislation has come out requiring this in some states, so that's awesome. Usually those salaries are also huge. The range, I mean, the range is huge, which is always unclear as to where you might fall in that, but at least it's something to start with. If that's not provided, and if a recruiter on an initial call is asking one of their required questions of what are your salary requirements for this role, I I always, if I'm asked that question and I don't have any context of where they're at, I do not share numbers first. I first answer with, I can understand why you're asking that question. I appreciate it. I would first love to understand if you have a designated range for this role that I might be able to learn first and just try to put the ball right back in their court. Sometimes they come back with a range and they're like, all right, they asked, I'll share the range. Sometimes they may push back again and may say, we don't have a set range yet. We're just trying to understand what candidates are looking for. You'll see this, I think, more often with startups that, again, are like, we're hiring for this role for the first time. What are we going to get somebody at? So if that's the case, you might see that. And again, if you're hard pressed to give an answer, I would again lean back on the research that you've done, the understanding of the role generally, and when in doubt, provide a slightly larger range that you can say, I know that there will be a full compensation package we'll talk about at that time. I I would be very interested to learn more about that before confirming anything on my end.
I also think it is slightly easier to answer that question once you are within a role. And you're essentially trying to evaluate what would it take me to leave my current job. I think myself, I'm probably a little bit more eager to answer that question on their behalf because for me it's like, okay, I'm often reasonably happy at my current job because I've intentionally selected companies that I enjoy being at. So I'd rather get the answer out there to say this is the rough number I'd need to be at. Let's not waste each other's time if we're not there. So similarly, following up after, I give a number saying, is this within your expected range? Such that, it can sort of be solved if not. But I'm the type, and maybe this is not normal, that is perpetually like feeling out the market and having conversations with companies just so I can understand how these things are changing over time. Because there are sort of dramatic shifts, especially within the tech industry over the past 5 years, both, like the inflated salaries during COVID and some of a retraction afterwards or reduction back to the mean since then.
To the theme of this panel, there's an unspoken rule I was exposed to that it's worth considering changing your job if you can get a 30% or more raise out of a move. So, in valuing your time and having the conversation, if you have to lead with answering that question, I think that's a reasonable bar to set. Tell me we're having this conversation with the potential net result of me making 30% more at the end of it, and then we can continue if so.
Great. I know this is also kind of touched upon during some of our conversations, but do you guys have any suggestions on how candidates can tactfully approach a counteroffer if the initial offer is lower than expected?
Emma, do you have thoughts on this? Just to pass the mic.
Yeah, I guess I'm staying pretty quiet because I didn't get to negotiate my salary. I was at a startup and I was given equity options, so it was more of like a, uh debating like starting bonuses, things like that. So I'm more just listening right now.
And a counteroffer could for sure apply to things outside of salary too, or to go back and forth. So that's super interesting. Cool. Just wanted to make sure. Yeah, if the initial offer is lower than expected, again, it's sort of honestly, it's a red flag to me if you're getting to the end of many interviews usually, and the salary that they come out with is like already not clear. And maybe I think we need to set those kinds of expectations for ourselves as employees interviewing for jobs these days. Like, it is not okay to spend as much effort as we do on interview processes without that clarity. Like, final package is what it is. It's not going to become obvious and crystal clear until you get an offer. But if you don't have a general sense of what the company has in mind for this role and you're already there and it's lower, like, I don't know, that is for sure a flag to me. And yeah, Neil, your time has value. You literally spent hours in those interviews and prepping for them. So that's kind of a side note, maybe a flag about the company and your process if you feel like continuing on. But if you get that and it's lower than you would expect, I think it's very appropriate to write a well-worded email that says why that number doesn't meet your expectations and what the specific things you would want to see to counter that. Again, is it if they can't do higher salary, is it equity? Is it PTO? Is it a signing bonus? Lots of options that you can kind of decide for yourself and make that clear in your response.
I'd like to, the stage and frame in which at least I've always received a job offer is generally the hiring manager is going to call you. It's going to be either out of the blue or very last minute schedule. And it's going to be a quick call where they get really excited and say, hey, you got the job. Here's the number. And I think what they want, and I've been on both sides of the coin. What I always wanted when I was a hiring manager was you to say yes immediately. But I think the appropriate response that I've always taken is, thank you so much. This impacts more than just me. This impacts, in my case, like a community, a family. And I want to make sure that I have that discussion with them. And make sure as I go through both the benefits package and the offer that it works. So, that is the chance where you get to be a little bit more emotional, to give yourself an out that they can't say, reply immediately. If a company does expect like an exploding offer for you to give them an answer by tomorrow, again, that is another red flag in my eyes to avoid. So I always say, ideally give me the weekend. I'm going to go through, I'm going to put it in the big spreadsheet that I've, maintained throughout the years to understand like, income versus budget. And then I'd like to, send them an email, ask them to have a conversation about where to go from next steps.
The two competing offers for you situation is also a really good one to be in. Generally, when I'm interviewing for new roles, I try to interview for more than one thing, even if there's one of the jobs that I'm really excited about. I usually end up finding interesting things out about all of the jobs that I'm exploring, and new possibilities open up along the way, not the least of which is, hey, I really like company A, but I happen to get a company B offer that has this advantage over company A. I would be delighted to choose you if only you do the following things to help make you the obvious correct choice.
Great, thank you all. We have been getting a couple questions in the Q&A, so I'll get to those in a minute, but wanted to ask our last kind of like pre-planned question, which is how should entry-level candidates approach salary negotiation as compared to a mid-career or someone more senior in their career, if there are different strategies you might use. And I might also love to invite you two to talk a little bit about what you did uniquely kind of at a first job, not negotiating the initial salary, but later on.
Yeah. So I guess my position was, or my circumstance was a little bit interesting. I didn't deal with a hiring manager. It's a startup of like 15 people. It's about doubled in a year. So I was given, basically, we didn't talk about salary until the very end, just here it is, equity. And since I was moving from Maryland to Northern California, it was very easy for me to ask for a signing bonus and even to negotiate that signing bonus. And then a year into the position, as startups, we've kind of talked about a little bit, a little all over the place. No one in a startup that small is paying attention to your career trajectory. No one is paying attention to you specifically following like, hey, this person deserves a raise. So about a year in, I was able to negotiate a backdated raise just based on them looking back at everything I had done. And initially, I was met with some passive aggressiveness and some friction there, but I kind of I spent a lot of time thinking about whether I deserved it and talking to people who are more experienced with jobs and salaries than I am. And basically, everyone was like, "You should just ask. If you have the proof, you should just ask." So I did, and even though there was some pushback, I still was able to get the raise. So though it was a little bit scary, especially like first job and trying to negotiate with like the CEO of a small company that, of course, we've been talking about like money is up in the air, that kind of thing. It was interesting, but I would just say like come in with all of your breath from Harvey Mudd, let's say. Like even though I was hired for a chemistry production job, turns out my biostats, my coding experience was actually very useful, and I was able to use that as leverage, right? So there are more. You are such a whole person, and there are so many things that the employer wants to know about you more than maybe you even know. So yes, that's from my first job point of view.
Hell yeah, Emma. That's awesome.
Um, yeah, that is an awesome story. I sort of want to reiterate from like the early career, especially if you're going to companies that do have a ton of people in the same role, there may be less flexibility, but that's where you get to, essentially talk with both the recruiter and the hiring manager to see if there are things that can either promote your growth within the team, either by asking them to set you up with a mentor of the sorts or offer some of the monetary perks. Large companies generally don't negotiate time off that easily, especially for entry level. But I know, within like my mid-career role, I've specifically asked for years that I had at other companies to be viewed as tenure at my current company when calculating my PTO, as a lot of companies have PTO tied to tenure for some reason. So that's yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I just to go back to something Emma said too, of like, um, oh gosh, now I'm gonna lose it. Oh, if you're the kind of person that like is maybe not sure if you deserve more, you definitely deserve more. I feel like that's sort of like a best practice or like a rule of thumb. If you're someone that's like, I deserve it no matter what, I mean, that's maybe the question mark, but many of us in this room are like, did I do enough? You did enough. And like, it's very, very likely that, you are in a position to advocate for more for yourself, or ideally not need to advocate, but be in that position to be recognized for that work. So yeah, shout out again, Emma, to doing that advocacy and figuring out navigating that, because we're not in the position of power as employees who are asking for more for ourselves from our employers who are employing us and paying us, to do the great work that we're doing. So it's hard to find that balance of power. To the question of like, is there a difference between entry-level candidates approaching the salary negotiation compared to mid-level senior? My gut says like we should all be treating it the same, but I know that there's nuance to that, and like what you expect might change over time. But the general approach of like, who am I? What do I deem as appropriate for, this role, like the needs of my life right now, uh, the research that goes into play, the creating like finding your allies at work, like all of that I think exists regardless of your level. And I think the more that entry level folks learn that faster and treat it like I am worthy, I deserve to be here, I deserve like to be paid well, the better for them as a community, and ultimately for the company too, because you're going to get great people and retain them. Once you make it to the senior level or higher, you've been through this, you're now jaded, you kind of know what to do in some ways. We're all learning, but like you might have more things in your pocket ready to go, in terms of what you might be asking for, or you're dealing with a higher salary that makes, I don't know, the discussion feel a little bit different. But at the end of the day, I would argue that we should all be kind of, approaching these things the same way, and learning that early on.
With the MUD audience, like this undervaluing yourself seems to be a cultural trait of our community. So I think it's a great example to learn from. Thanks for sharing that, Emma. One of the other things that I would encourage all of the levels to learn, and learn it earlier if you can, is if your career offers you equity as part of your compensation practice, learn how that works early on. I see people at all career stages mishandling equity, which can be a fantastic opportunity to really transform the life that you have out of your career, starting or even much later in career. Uh, that's really a chance to take something substantial away from a company that you've invested a substantial amount of yourself into. Learn what it really means and how you take advantage of it.
Yo, I'm here to attend an hour-long discussion on how equity packages work and how to navigate them, because I'm still learning, but that's a, yeah, great call out, Neil.
Yeah. Vanessa, we have another one.
I was just gonna say, Neil, maybe you want to come back and do a talk with us.
Sure.
Yeah. There are also fun statistics there, depending upon where the company is incorporated and what states the company are incorporated, that require them to publish the cap tables, even if they are a private company. So similarly, uh, the state of Massachusetts is the most common one that I have experience with, where you can actually assign a percentage to the equity that they are giving you, and then do your own evaluation of what you think the whole company is worth.
Great. Thank you all again. We'll get into our Q&A now. So we have a question. Other than using quantitative data comparison, what are some qualitative or personal points that can prove one's value when negotiating a salary? And just a little more context with this. An offer that I'm currently considering is at a company that leverages their employees' satisfaction with the culture of the company as a reason why they pay less than the industry standard. Oof. How can one communicate with HR/hiring manager that work culture doesn't necessarily make up for lower pay?
I'd be happy to step in there as I, stepped into being severely underpaid straight out of mud at a startup that highlighted their culture. Um, you know, I, I think there's only so long that a company can sort of like cut at the fringes of both salary and then likely benefits to the point where that undermines culture in and of itself. Um, so that is an argument which may stand on 2 feet for a year, maybe a year and a half, at which point a company will start to see lots of turnover. I think to be successful in an environment like that really is highlighting what you add to these small organizations, such as what Emma said, that goes beyond the basics of a job description. Because, when there will be turnover and when there will be sort of individuals who then leave a company, that's also opportunities to grow, to become an important part of the institutional memory of an organization, and hopefully, in turn, be able to negotiate salary that comes with it.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think this is very dependent on where you're at in this moment and what that offer is. And again, will it meet at least the minimum of what you need right now? And that's kind of a shit argument, excuse me, to make. But we all know that like that is a bit of a excuse that doesn't align. Like it doesn't just because you have good culture doesn't mean you can't pay a little bit more. It's because they're not investing in it. They don't have the budget for it, whatever it is right now. Let's say you take that job and it's pays lower than what you would expect compared to another company. I just like to remind myself that like if there's what are the reasons I'm taking this job right now, if not for the exact salary that I want? Am I going to gain skills in this position that will line me up for the next role? Am I going to, in theory, have upward mobility within this company, which is always not guaranteed, TBD on, if that actually can happen. But do you want to test the waters there again, knowing that nothing is permanent, knowing that you can gain experiences and skills that help you to the next thing that ideally pays you something that you would want more of? This is all assuming that you've made that decision that like you're gaining those things in addition to the salary that may not be as high as it should be. That company will inevitably feel the results of that, as Joe's saying, I think in the long term.
Katie, I think, made a point about power and negotiation earlier. A place where the power balance shifts is when you're at a company, you're doing well, you're valued, and you're asking for something reasonable, like Emma did, to represent the impact that you're having there. So while it still feels like you're talking to somebody with more power, and that may be true, your power is real. Managers generally don't want to put the effort in to go find somebody else to do the job you are doing very well today. And a good manager will look for an opportunity to compensate you appropriately for the contribution you're making to the company. The way to boost the power of that in a different job market than I think we have today is to bring in the counteroffer situation where you've had a frank conversation with your manager ahead of time about the fact that you are looking for more. That could be at another company. Oh, hey, you had a great conversation with another company, but you really like the company you're at today. So, manager, do something about it. Try not to take that to the ultimatum level, though, because when you get to that point, you need to be prepared to go if you don't get what you want.
Great, thank you. Our last Q&A question is, how to negotiate salaries for more niche roles, for example, like post-PhD, if there are perhaps fewer roles suiting your specific skill set.
I have a very specialized role. I'm not sure this will translate, but arguably companies need one of me, and a lot of companies already have that me. So I just have to keep my eyes open for situations that are companies that look good, looking to hire somebody who can do my job, be me there. And then when those opportunities come along, even if I wasn't necessarily planning to say, oh, hey, I want to go explore this, be open to the possibility that this is the right time to make a change.
Yeah, I like that. And while I'm not speaking from as niche of a position, I wonder, going back to what's been said before around what of your gathered experiences and skills that may not be immediately applied to that, like written in the niche job description, you can still kind of lean on to make the argument of, well, I'm bringing this as well, and that's going to make that impact. Or again, maybe that doesn't happen immediately when you sign the offer, but later can you make the case? Which again is harder than at the beginning, but it's not impossible. Thinking about when that might be your best leverage and leaning on your mixture of skills and experiences may be helpful.
This isn't like totally related to negotiating salaries specifically, but a lot of the people who come who started at the company I work for are in more niche like food scientist roles, and the way that they've kind of even found the company is through like communities, conferences, things like that. So I think that like finding your community, and even though you think it's a really niche role, there's more than just you. So there are more people to talk to, and there's definitely a community out there. And I don't know. I always say like I think connections are like the most important thing when finding a job, all these things, which really sucks. But I think that's true with even like salary negotiation. Like use your connections to just start conversations.
Um, Speaking from, I'm in a position now where I'm using a very niche software for a large company that's sort of growing it and seeing the use case for the first time. I always just recommend, looking for those innovators in those new roles. If it is a niche market, it's best to be on the portion of it that's going to grow over time, and that's going to sort of be the stellar example, where you get to pick and choose in the future, even if this negotiation period wasn't the most ideal. Um,
Awesome. I think that that's all really insightful and really helpful information. Just keeping the time in mind, do you guys have any final words of advice you'd like to give current students at HMC?
Uh, Back to a very early point from Neil. Uh, what what is happiness to you, and what is, what makes you feel fulfilled in this moment? That's going to change over time. Many times it is not about that final number. I know we're talking about that, and it's very, very important to feel that power in the negotiation. But if you can keep yourself rooted in that broader understanding of yourself and what you need and what makes you feel happy and fulfilled in this moment, that should lead you in the right direction.
I owe my entire career to going to a Celtic music concert with three Mud alumni before I started grad school. I sat down and I said, hey, and they said, hey, you're a Mudder. Do you want a summer job? And I said, no way, I'm about to go to grad school. They said, oh, okay. The next day, the company they were working at was on the front page of a physical newspaper. I said, that looks cool. And I called them up and said, okay, this is crazy, but what would I be doing during the summer? And it just went from there. It was an opportunity I made myself open to, and I have no regrets. You all, Mutter community, have that same ability to seize opportunities. Just watch for them and grab them when you spot them.
Kind of going off of that, I know how it felt like the end of my senior year at Mud. It felt like I had to get a job, like everyone was getting jobs, like a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. And for some reason, you feel that stress after like so many years of like literally going to work every day. So don't feel that stress. Like it's okay. And just like Neil said, like there are opportunities out there and they will come to you. And luckily, as a Mud student, we are in a like you're in a place of privilege and you will have those opportunities. It will be okay.
And to continue the theme of community, both mud and otherwise, remember that while you are the individual who is going to be the advocate in advocating for yourself, you have so many others around you who have also gone through this and are excited and willing to support you in that. So please make sure that, this isn't an isolating experience for yourself, but instead an exciting opportunity where you get to work with your friends and family to, craft the response and successfully negotiate and learn throughout it all.
A career is not linear. It's a really great thing to remember.
Yes, all the taglines, career is not linear, rely on your community, everything happens in the time that it's supposed to. All these nice things. So with that, I wanted to say thank you so much to all of our panelists, Neil, Joe, Katie, Emma. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And thank you so much to our audience for watching and anyone that might be watching this recording. We truly appreciate your time. And this recording will be uploaded to the Harvey Mudd College's YouTube channel, available for all of our community members to view. So if you're interested, if you're interested in being a speaker in any future event, please feel free to reach out to APR. And just thank you again, everyone, for viewing this. And I hope that you all take care and have a good evening.